Now we want to go in and play with some other local adjustments. And so spot removal, that's going to be one that you're going to play with quite often. And so let me zoom in here on my image. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having freckles and moles and whatnot. But let's say we wanted to remove some of the distracting elements, or we want to make this super clean. And so the way you're going to do this is you're going to just click on those areas that you want to remove, and Lightroom is going to figure out what it thinks is the best cover-up. You have flexibility in changing that, but I'll show you how to get started. Now, the idea here is it works off of a brush concept or a brush metaphor. The size of the brush here, you can see if I go that big or that small, you can change the size of the brush. And so the idea with something like this is you want a brush size that's roughly about the same size as the item you're trying to cover up. Not too big because you cover up too much, not too small because you have to do it multiple times. Here's a shortcut. Now you can't quite see it, so you'll have to write it down. On your keyboard, the two bracket keys to the right of the letter P on your keyboard, the left bracket makes the brush smaller. The right bracket makes the brush bigger. Super handy, so you don't have to come back here and hit the slider every time. If I want to make the brush smaller, I hit my left bracket. If I realize I need to make it bigger, I hit the right bracket. Okay, so the bracket keys make the brush bigger or smaller. The feather is how soft the edge of the brush is. Now, when you're doing stuff like this, I do recommend having some feather to it. Sometimes you can have more feather than not. Notice the brush here, it's got an inner circle and an outer circle. Okay, the outer circle is basically the size of the feather. And so the more feather here, 100%, the fuzzier it is on the outside, the more narrow, the harder the edge is. So whenever you're doing cover-ups like this, you do want to have some kind of feather. Now you can go back in and adjust that, but let's leave it at 50% right now. And then opacity is just how much of what you're covering up shows through. It's either transparent, which means it's not 100% opacity, or it's 100% opaque and it covers everything up. I'm going to leave it at 100% because that's what I typically work on. We have a heal option here and a clone option. I will go ahead and show you the difference, but for right now we're going to say heal. Heal. So let's work quickly. And so what I'm going to do is going to click on this, and I'll show you how this works, and then we'll go through and quickly edit these things. So notice we now have a circle here and another circle here. This one, I don't know, it's hard to see on the skin, but it's pointing to that one. Well, what it's telling me is it's using this area here and covering that area up. So if it misguessed, I mean, it did a really good job. Look how clean that looks. If I zoom in here, oops, actually it was already zoomed in. But if I took this and I moved it out here, notice it looked kind of funky, you know, or if I took this and moved it over here, you know, it's taking this area and covering it up on top of that. But since these are very similar, it actually did a good job of covering things up. So the idea here is I want to work quickly, and I can go in and if my brush is the appropriate size, I can quickly go in and cover this stuff up. And you know, I can let Lightroom do the edits, or the guessing I should say. I'm just jumping around here, move down a little bit. You know, fortunately there's not a lot of stuff to do. But if you work quickly enough, you can actually get a lot done. And then if you have to go back in and fine-tune things, now it may look like I'm just zipping around here, and I am, but you'll see the result here in 1 second. And you can kind of see, I'm just actually quickly moving through this. Let's get that. And again, these tools also are non-destructive, which means if you clicked on something that you didn't want, and I'll do that here in 1 second. Okay, let's say I inadvertently got carried away. It's been known to happen. And I clicked on that. And it covered up that bead. I'm like, how did I make that mistake? Well, you can select it. And all I have to do is hit the delete key. And that will get rid of it. Any of these can be selected again. Okay, so once they're highlighted like that, I can delete them if necessary. If I need to redo it, I can. Okay. So now we have these little circles over here. And so one of the things I can show, this one? Nope. Is, what are my overlay options? Anyway, so here is, here it is, overlay. I can turn it to auto. So overlays are just these little doodads right here. Okay, I can say always when they're selected, never, so I don't see them at all, or auto, which means they kind of go on and off. If I'm over the image, they'll come back on. If I roll off of it, it's kind of handy because it shows that they're not there. Okay, so what we've done here is we've gone through and we made changes to the image by covering up these spots. And so again, with this, it's a brush, and you just click on it and it'll create that little brush shape. Now you could also go in and create brush strokes. Let me show you that in a second. But for this, let's say I had a little tiny brush and I wanted to cover up, actually, let me go ahead and do this one. All right, so I'm going to delete that one. And there's a little mole back. Okay, so let's say I had my brush and it was just a little too small. Just try to do it one more time. All right, so it did a pretty good job, but it didn't get everything. Well, I can delete it and come back, or if it's just a brush stroke or brush dab, notice when I do this, I can make the brush bigger. And really what I'm doing at this point is increasing the size of the brush, which is super handy because I can go back in at any point. Here's what I'm covering up. 1 second while it redraws, and I can bring it over here. And if it brought it up in the hair, which was the wrong spot for it, I can move this back down into an area that it looks nice and clean. So all of these adjustments that we made right now are using the spot removal tool with the healing brush option. Now, here's the difference. I'm going to go ahead and make a cover up right here, just so you can really see it, and we'll use the skin as the cover up. Okay, so it kind of blends the two together, which, it does a pretty darn good job. I mean, it kind of looks believable. Now that is the healing option. Now if I use the cloning option, it's going to give me an exact copy. So with that selected, I go in and get an exact copy. So maybe that one we'll go back in and redo to show you a different example. Let's say I wanted to cover up something down here. Okay, and I take one of these beads. For some reason I wanted to put a bead down there because that looks like the right spot for it. So this is the healing option, and you can kind of see how it blends it in. Okay, now the skin tone's a little different around the edges. This is a little bit lighter, this is a little bit darker. If I went with the healing option, it gives me an exact copy. So that's really the difference. If you need an exact copy of something, make sure it says clone. If you want it to blend in with the original, set it to heal. Okay, and if you do something like that, you might want to just delete it because it looks kind of funky. All right. So here, now we have all those covered up. We can go on to another item here. So that one is our spot removal tool. Again, we have a brush size, feather, and opacity. And this one we also mentioned when we were looking at it the first time is the background, because we lightened everything up, the background went a little too dark. I'm sorry, too light. Now it shows through as kind of red. And we don't want to see that. I don't want it to be, red looking like that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an adjustment brush. So here, this is the adjustment brush on the far right. The letter K is a shortcut. Take a look. It looks very similar to our basic options with some additional features here. And so if I needed to, I can go in and create this brush. Now again, it works off a brush. Notice down here we have a size, feather, flow. Flow just means how intense the effect comes out. Think of it as like a spray paint can or something. The higher the pressure, the more the flow. The lower the pressure, the less the flow. So that's kind of the analogy I like to use. So here it's got a big feather. Maybe we lower the feather here so it's not so hard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and paint. Now you can see it defaulted to an exposure change of +1 stops. So it made it even lighter. But I can go back in and make it go darker. So notice that area is getting darker. How awesome is that? Okay, so if I bring it down to a negative amount of stops, or even 2 stops, if you need to, you can actually move the slider, or I can double click and make it a specific number if I want to. As long as you have this little pin, they call them pins, selected, I can keep going and painting that selective adjustment. Now we've got a little bit of feather to it. Let's change the brush here. So I'm going to change the feather a little bit more. So it's a little bit softer, kind of blends in with her hair and her ear. Not too weird. And over here. So I can actually do both sides with one adjustment. Cool. Look at that. It's kind of where we wanted it initially. If I wanted to, I can lower the flow. Remember the intensity. So I can kind of lower that down and just get more of a subtle effect along the edge of her hair. So it's not so abrupt and, just, spurts out all in one shot. I can go ahead and just paint it in and build it up. All right. So once you've created that, you have this pin, and so from there we can go ahead and make other adjustments. So after we make one adjustment or adjustment brush, we can actually make additional ones if necessary. So up top here, if I click on New, it's actually going to go ahead and make a new adjustment brush. You can see this one, the initial one, is grayed out, and that's fine. If we need to reactivate it, you can go ahead and re-edit that. Okay. Notice that it turned red here really quickly when I rolled over that little pin. The red shows me the area that I painted, or the masking area. And I can always go down here and say Show Selected Mask Overlay. So if I wanted to, I can actually go back in, and paint this as well. Now that's darkening it, and I really don't want that effect. And so what I can do while I'm in the edit mode is I can actually go in and erase those areas as well. So think of the masking as kind of being, you're painting in an adjustment, and you can actually erase out that same adjustment if you have areas like this. Click on Erase, and again, it works off of a brush. I make the size bigger, and it's got the little minus sign. And so really what that's going to do is remove or subtract that effect. Now if I went up here, it's going to remove it too. Don't want to do that for this, but if you got in, somewhere in an area that you don't want it to be, you can actually go in and erase it out. So now let's go ahead and make a new pin or a new adjustment, and let's give her some highlights. How's that? Let's go in and maybe paint in her hair here. So we had the density or the flow set fairly low, and that's when you make the initial brush stroke. So it's not like the healing brush or the clone stamp, where you change it and it updates it. It's kind of like when you're actually making that effect initially. So if I make the brush even smaller, yeah, you can go in and get kind of crazy. Looks like I'm bringing back those lion stripe hairstyles. So you can decide whether you like it or not. I think I gave her that gray hair effect. You can change the, oh, look at that, isn't that pretty? Change the color temperature and so on. So again, you can have multiple pins. I can go back to this one and edit it. I can go back to this one and edit it if I choose to. Or in this case, and you'll thank me later, is I'm going to delete that. Oh yeah, that's way better. But I think I do want something in there, so I'm going to go ahead and lower the flow, increase the size, and definitely increase the feather. I'm going to make a big feather. I want to lighten up just that area right here, just to bring out some little bit more detail. Cool. All right. So we brought a little bit more detail in her hair. So really, that's all we need to do with this adjustment brush. It's a way to go in and selectively change the exposure, highlight shadows, midtones, and so on.